We use functions in JavaScript to manage reusable blocks of code. That way we don't have to keep retyping things that we need to reuse, in multiple parts of our actual program. So let's look at how functions work. You write a special keyword, function, and then give it a name, like say hello. And notice with this naming convention, we use what we call camel case. The first letter of the first word is lowercase. And if you just had one word, you would do it like that. But if you have two words kind of back to back, the second word, the first letter is capitalized, and so on. So even if you had three words like this, you would follow that same convention from there on. That's camel case. So now from here, we're going to do the parentheses and then the curly braces like we did with if statements and with for loops and while loops. So now that we have this, we can put as much code as we want inside of this function. So we could do something like console.log. We could even do multiple lines, like I said. You just log out a number, like 10, say. Okay, so now when we write this here, and if I refresh, you're going to see nothing happens, right, to the page. And that's because when we do this, this is a function declaration. This is basically a blueprint of the function itself. This isn't going to run the function, or as we say, invoke the function, okay? Or also, likewise, you might hear people say call the function. Okay, so we're not calling the function here or invoking it. We're just writing the blueprint for it. If we want to actually invoke the function, we have to write out its name, like that, and then have parentheses next to it. And then semicolon closes out that statement. So if I save this and now run it, the blueprint will be scanned by JavaScript. JavaScript will look at it and say, okay, we have this function here, and it's going to do some things inside of these curly braces. And then without this line, it wouldn't do anything. But once we have this line, it's saying, okay, let's execute this function. Let's do whatever is inside there. So if I refresh, you'll see there we go. It's logged out that first string and then just the random number 10 there. So that's how we can actually execute functions. Now keep in mind, sometimes you'll see anonymous functions, but typically there are specific use cases for that, and we won't get into that right now. Usually you want to give it a name like this. Now, another way to write out these functions that you'll see is like this. You'll see var variable, so the var keyword, and then give it the name. And then from there we would say equals, so no parentheses right there. Notice where the parentheses goes. It looks like an anonymous function on this side of the equal sign. But this is the equivalent of expressing it like that. So we could put all of this in here. Okay, now if I get rid of this, I'll just comment it out. And on a Mac, keep in mind, you can highlight everything and just do command and / to comment all of the lines at once. Okay, so I've commented all of that out. So we have this function here. And we'll just rename it say hello to just to demonstrate. Now, if I run this new function here, we'll get the same result over here. If I refresh, there you go. The same result comes out. So it works just the same this way. But the difference is we're naming it with a variable. So this is a little bit useful because it's a little more organized when we do it like this, and we'll see the use cases of that. Now, one last thing with functions I want you to know about is that you can pass arguments into the function. And what we mean by that is you can pass little variables into this actual function to be used. So things from the outside of your code can make their way inside of the function, and that's really helpful, that's really useful, and we'll see why down the line. But let's try one real quick. Let's do this. Say var add something. So that's the name of the function, and then we write function. And remember, you got to kind of get used to this notation here if you're going to use the variable form for writing the functions. Okay, so we're just going to add some things together. So we pass in as many arguments as we want. Okay, so we can say, in this case, let's just add two things together, and they're comma separated here. Okay, so now in here I can write return a plus b. Okay, and return is a special keyword. Return is if you want the function to actually output something into the code. So when we run this actual function, it's going to return the result. It's going to output it. It's a little different from console log, and you'll see why down the line. So let's try this out now. So if we want to use the arguments, we can do it like this, add something. And typically, you know, you would do that, right? But to actually use the arguments, just pass 2 things in there. In this case, since we're doing addition in there, we might as well just put 2 numbers in there. So 2 and 3 and see what happens. So let's save that and run it. And it's returning it out. Notice that it's returning it out, but you're not going to see it here in the console, okay? So that's something that's very important. You got to kind of use your imagination a little bit when you're writing this type of code. And you're going to see return quite a bit. Oftentimes when you're creating a function, the very last thing you're going to do is this return statement. And just so you know, after you do the return statement, even if you put code down here, after it, it's not going to run it. The return statement is kind of the final statement of the actual function. So how do we get it to log out? All we need to do is wrap this whole kind of function in a console.log method. So let's do that. So I've just wrapped it. I'm basically just calling this function or invoking it inside of this console.log method. Now if I refresh, there you go, you see the result. Okay, so remember, the return keyword, it is putting something outside of the function. When this gets run, okay, let's assume there's no console.log here. When this gets run, even though I refresh the page, you're not seeing anything in the console. We're not logging it. But in the computer's memory, you can kind of imagine that this just output the result, which is in this case 5. Okay, because we're just adding 2 plus 3. So that's a little bit about functions.